digital breadcrumbs he planted to mislead, and the courtroom where a jury finally named the deception for what it was. An elaborate performance that ended in murder. Welcome back to the channel. We tell difficult stories with empathy, facts, and respect for victims. If you value that too, consider subscribing and share this video so more people learn how coercive control masquerades as protection and how to spot it before it turns lethal. Broomfield, Colorado. Cul-de-sacs and mountain light. Christel Krug, 44, was the kind of person who trusted data. A biochemical engineer, a mother, someone who built order out of complexity. In the fall of 2023, that order began to collapse under a barrage of messages from someone claiming to be an ex from long ago. The tone was invasive, sexual, then threatening, creeping into her days, her routines, her sense of safety. She did the work victims are too often told to do. She saved the texts, printed the emails, and built a detailed log to track the stalker's escalation. She went to police. She asked for help at a tea home. Her husband Daniel played the part of the worried partner. Doors were checked. Cameras were positioned. Family rules were drawn up to keep the kids safe. Yet even as precautions multiplied, the stalker's messages seemed to know more and more. Details that felt uncomfortably specific, like someone was studying the household from the inside. To neighbors, it looked like a family under siege from a faceless outsider. To investigators, at first, it looked that way too. She documented everything, spoke to police, and set up cameras. So how did danger still find her in her own garage? The messages weren't random. They arrived in calculated waves. A crude proposition here, a taunt there, threats that referenced the family and suggested the sender was nearby. The voice grew bold, then menacing, and sometimes even pretended to threaten Daniel, as if to paint him as a fellow target. A clever move designed to pull husband and wife together against a common enemy. Investigators traced some of the communications to throwaway accounts and a burner phone. Others would later be linked to workplace IP addresses, an early crack in the disguise. All the while, technology around the house faltered in suspicious ways. A doorbell camera was covered with tape. Surveillance that should have been recording dropped offline at pivotal moments. If a stranger was casing the home, how did they know exactly when to blind the lenses? That question would loom over the timeline. What stands out is how methodical Christel was. Bodycam video later broadcast by ABC's 2020 shows her calm but exhausted, explaining the log she compiled and how the escalation made her paranoid everywhere I go. You can hear in her voice the fatigue of someone forced to be both the victim and the archivist, someone who knows she will need proof to be believed. Detectives are about to pull a single thread, and the entire disguise will begin to tear. A school morning unfolds with the usual choreography. Drop-offs, messages, the hum of weekday life. Then a phone call to the Broomfield Police Department. A concerned husband asking for a welfare check. An officer arrives at the house on Promontory Loop. The garage door opens onto a scene that stops the world. Christel is found unresponsive, beaten in the head and stabbed in the heart. The officer calls it in. Other units arrive. A homicide investigation begins. At first, the working theory is straightforward. A stalker escalated to murder. The ex-boyfriend becomes the focus until his alibi hardens. He's out of state and ultimately cleared. Now the physical scene and the digital trail have to agree. Investigators chart the hours. A narrow window when surveillance was compromised. The cadence of phone activity, and the strange overlap between the stalker's knowledge and family routines. The more they compare, the less sense the outsider theory makes. Something closer, someone closer, would have to explain it. If the prime suspect never left another state, who knew the family's secrets well enough to fake a stalker and sabotage the cameras, real investigations often hinge on unglamorous work. Subpoenas, server logs, login timestamps, cell site records. In this case, that grunt work starts whispering a name investigators thought they could rule out. Daniel Krug. The anonymous messages? Some trace to IP addresses at Daniel's workplace, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. The burner phone? Part of a pattern that prosecutors will later stitch together as the communications backbone of a manufactured threat. The real ex-boyfriend goes from suspect to witness. The phantom dissolves. Meanwhile, the house tells its own story. A doorbell lens covered with tape. Cameras down when they shouldn't be. A window of opportunity that aligns with the school routine. Prosecutors will argue that Daniel waited in the garage, struck his wife in the head, stabbed her, and manipulated communications to muddy the timeline before heading to work. Crucially, they acknowledge the case is largely circumstantial, but insist the pieces interlock without forcing them. On December 16, 2023, 2 days after the killing, police arrest Daniel Krug. Within the week, December 21, 2023, the 17th Judicial District Attorney files charges. First-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. A case that began as a stalking probe is now a story about a husband playing both puppet master and hero. Then, when discovery threatens, executioner. An arrest is not a conviction. The defense will drive a wedge into the state's theory. Where is the DNA? Where is the blood? Can you prove who held the knife? For the prosecution, the path to proof runs through behavioral patterns and digital footprints. It's not just where the messages came from, it's how they evolved. The early flirtations mutating into explicit threats, the way the stalker conveniently targeted Daniel too, and the near synchrony between marital breakdown and the message's escalation. Jurors are told to look at the intent behind the pattern. A staged crisis designed to frighten a reluctant spouse back into the marriage, and to cast the husband as protector once police were involved. When that theater failed, the plot turned deadly. The defense counters: no direct physical evidence ties Daniel to the act itself. No conclusive DNA, no blood transfer the state can hold up and say, this is him. They argue that in the rush to untangle the stalker hoax, detectives narrowed too quickly on the husband, that the unknown partial DNA and other gaps suggest an alternative assailant could have exploited the chaos. In essence, if we're building a case from inferences, are they reasonable inferences? Or storytelling that fits a preferred suspect? This is where circumstantial cases live or die. Do the ordinary facts of a life, work IP addresses, shared devices, routine schedules, camera outages, add up to something only one person could orchestrate? Or can they plausibly describe a world where someone else slipped in and out unnoticed? Reasonable doubt versus possible doubt. Watch how both sides try to define that difference in the jury's mind. Spring 2025. The courtroom becomes the final laboratory where this case is tested. Jurors hear about the stalking log and watch bodycam clips of a worried, meticulous victim. They hear about the workplace IP trail and burner phones. They hear from experts and from those who knew the marriage was in trouble. A prosecutor frames Daniel as a man playing puppet master, creating the threat, then trying to become the rescuer, and, when exposed, choosing a permanent solution. The defense urges caution. No DNA, no blood. They say, don't let your feelings collapse the presumption of innocence. After a multi-week trial, the jurors deliberate. They return with verdicts that answer the core question: guilty of first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation on April 17, 2025. The following day, April 18, 2025, the judge imposes the mandatory sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional time on the other counts. The district attorney's office issues the formal announcement. National and local outlets echo a central irony. The victim's own diligence, her logs, her early reports, helped knit together the circumstantial case that convicted her killer. Verdict is in, but the lessons are just beginning. What did this case reveal about stalking, technology, and trust? True crime headlines often end at the verdict. Life doesn't. In victim impact statements and news coverage, we learn how far the shock ripples. 3 children now raised by extended family. A father who speaks through grief about the hole this leaves. A community that watched a suburban homicide become a national cautionary tale about coercive control and digital manipulation. We also learn how thin the wall between safety and danger can be when the person claiming to protect you is the one orchestrating the fear. Prevention advice often centers on strangers. Vary your routes, park in light, walk with keys between your fingers. Less publicized are the warning signs when control comes wrapped in concern, when a partner centralizes access to devices and cameras, when technology that should make you safer becomes another lever of surveillance and gaslighting. This case puts those dynamics in plain view. If the stalker lives inside the story, what are the early tells, online and offline, that friends and family can learn to spot? Patterns that matter, none are dispositive alone. Together they tell a story. Sudden, anonymous messages that know intimate details of your schedule or conversations, especially if they sometimes threaten your partner too, casting them as the co-target. Inconsistent camera behavior, lenses taped, feeds down during key windows, or systems that only fail when one person is home. A partner who centralizes control for safety. They handle the security app, they change passwords, they insist all accounts run through them. Escalation from attention, pressure, intimidation, threats, mapped across weeks in a way that tracks relationship conflict. Over-informed threats, messages that reference what you told police or your timeline, details unlikely for a stranger to know. If you or someone you know is experiencing stalking or coercive control, document everything, screenshots, headers, dates, times, but don't confront the sender. Back up evidence off devices a partner controls. Share your log with a trusted friend or advocate. Consider a safety plan with local resources. Police can coordinate with victim advocacy groups. Treat camera outages and device anomalies as data points, not glitches. These steps won't stop a determined abuser, but they preserve the truth, which is often at the end. One decision exposed everything. Investigators followed the data. Here's how those pieces locked. When we flatten the story to its mechanics, the illusion becomes clearer. Narrative seeding. Over weeks, a persona emerges. The ex-boyfriend, painted as crude, jealous, and nearby. Messages escalate in threat, sometimes menacing Daniel too, to encourage a siege mentality that unites the couple against an outside enemy. Technical sabotage. Cameras that should be the neutral witness are blinded or go dark at key moments. If a stranger were probing the house, we'd expect opportunistic outages. Here, the outages correlate with windows of time only a household insider would predict. Digital leakage. The anonymous messages sometimes route through workplace IPs and devices connected to Daniel's sphere, shrinking the pool of plausible authors. Add a burner phone pattern, and the anonymity starts to crumble. Crisis escalation. As police peel back layers and the ex is cleared out of state, the hoax teeters. Prosecutors say that's when the plan shifts to murder, to erase the one person who could best explain the pattern. The victim who had documented the timeline. Aftermath messaging. Post-crime communications seed confusion about timing and presence, attempting to widen the window and stretch alibis. But phones, cameras, and server logs keep their own diaries. Together, they form a net. A circumstantial case is like a mosaic. Any tile alone is nothing. Together, the image becomes obvious. The jury saw an image they believed only one person could have assembled, and they said so with guilty verdicts. So why did the jury convict without smoking gun DNA? Because circumstantial evidence, when consistent, is not a guess, it's geometry. Jurors learned that Chris Till brought a meticulous log to police in November 2023 and sat for bodycam interviews that showed a rational, frightened woman doing everything right. They learned some threats came from Daniel's workplace network and that a doorbell camera was taped over. They learned the ex-boyfriend was in another state and ultimately cleared. They learned about the narrow window when the attack had to occur, just after a school drop-off. They heard the state's framing of motive. A marriage failing, a hoax to frighten and win her back, and when exposure loomed, a decision to silence her. They also heard the defense insist there was no direct physical evidence of Daniel committing the act. In the end, the jurors decided the pattern was coherent and exclusive enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On April 17, 2025, they convicted. On April 18, 2025, the judge imposed life without parole, and the district attorney's office released the official statement, closing a case that began as a stalking mystery and ended as a study in deception. There's an emptiness no sentence fills. 3 children growing up without their mother. A family reconstructing daily life around a permanent absence. Coverage of the sentencing captured a father's grief and the resolve of relatives stepping in. For them, the case is more than evidence and verdicts. It's birthdays, graduations, and ordinary mornings with a missing center. We often say, if you see something, say something. The Krug case asks us to add, if you feel something, record something. Keep the log. Save the headers. The truth of a long pattern is hard to hold in your head, but it's visible on paper. That record might not save you in the moment, but it could save someone later or help a jury reconstruct a story that a killer tried to erase. Her spreadsheet didn't stop the crime, but it told the truth afterward, and that truth made justice possible. In the final weeks of 2023, the world around Christel Krug kept getting smaller. The inbox that used to be mundane, work updates, school reminders, receipts, became a place of dread. Messages from a supposed ex-boyfriend arrived at odd hours, full of sexual hostility and escalating threats. Each one tried to move the border inward, from the internet to the driveway, from the driveway to the garage, from the garage to the space right behind her. She did not wave this away as paranoia. She built a record, dates, times, screenshots, phrasing patterns, subject lines, so the story wouldn't get rewritten later. Police body cam would capture her walking officers through that log in October and November 2023, explaining how the tone had turned from crude to credibly frightening and how she feared someone was watching the home. At first, the steps are small and sensible. Vary routes, don't travel alone after dark, keep the kids close, check the doorbell camera feed. But fear has a psychology. If it's allowed to stay, it starts to rearrange the furniture of your days. You stop exercising outdoors. You skip errands. You keep your phone on maximum volume, jump at delivery knocks, and start narrating the day to your own devices. I'm leaving now. I'm arriving now. So there is a trail you can point to if anyone ever doubts you. And still, the messages kept coming. When a threat knows your routines, ask, who taught it? An outsider watching? Or someone inside the story? Every performance needs props. There was the burner phone, a low-cost, low-trace device bought to exist just long enough to play a role. There were the throwaway accounts, names built for a single trick. Send, menace, delete. There were workplace IP traces, the kind of sloppiness that happens when a hoaxer gets confident or desperate, pushing messages through networks that would later point back to the wrong person entirely. And then there was the camera, the most neutral witness a house can own. Its eye covered with tape at key times, as if someone knew precisely when it needed to blink. For a while, the performance held. To friends and neighbors, the family looked besieged by a vulgar outsider. Police followed the logic. They looked toward the past, toward the supposed ex. What broke the illusion wasn't a dramatic confession. It was forensics by inches. Headers, logins, IP blocks, cell phone metadata. Which device touched which account at which time, and the alibi that hardened around the real ex-boyfriend, who was in Utah. As one line after another snapped back toward Daniel Krug, the mask began to tear. A clever plan can survive suspicion, but it rarely survives the math of metadata. The morning looked ordinary because that was the point. There was a school drop-off, the routine that creates a predictable gap. A welfare check call from a concerned husband, just careful enough to sound helpful, just early enough to look proactive. And then a garage, that liminal space between public and private, where an officer would find blunt force trauma and a stab wound to the heart on a 44-year-old mother of 3. In early reports and courtroom summaries, prosecutors argued the attacker used that narrow, predictable window, a window that aligned with camera outages and a lens literally blinded, to ambush the victim and then manipulate phone activity to blur the clock before heading to work. At the scene, detectives did what homicide detectives do. Secure, document, preserve. The house yielded fragments, not a neon arrow. The case would not be about a bloody shirt in a hamper or a stray DNA mote under a fingernail pointing perfectly at one person. The case would be circumstantial, a word juries sometimes hear like an apology, when it should be heard like a method. Circumstance is how most of life is proven. We do not walk through our days leaving perfect fingerprints on every choice. We leave patterns. No smoking gun? Then ask whether the smoke rises from 100 places at once. 2 days after the killing, December 16, 2023, Broomfield police arrested Daniel Krug. Within the week, December 21, 2023, the 17th Judicial District Attorney charged him with first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. The filing distilled weeks of weirdness into a single thesis. The stalker was a costume, and the performance had turned lethal. Public filings and later reporting outlined the prosecution's spine. Threats originated, at times, from networks tied to Daniel's workplace. A burner phone and throwaway accounts formed the communication skeleton. Home surveillance was compromised in ways that looked deliberate. A lens taped over feeds down during key windows. The ex was in Utah, not stalking a house in Broomfield. Motive: a marriage in collapse, a man losing control, staging fear to win her back, and when exposure loomed, a silencing. The defense would answer with the classic counterspine. No direct DNA or blood evidence tied Daniel to the act. Investigators failed to protect Chris Till despite her reports, then tunneled on the husband when the ex alibi landed. Unknown DNA on the tape covering a camera suggested a someone else. Circumstance, they argued, is not certainty. When two stories compete, jurors don't pick the prettier story. They pick the story that explains the most facts without breaking. Trials are less like movies and more like mosaics. Tiny tiles placed until an image emerges. Over several weeks in April 2025, jurors heard about the stalking log and watched bodycam video of a methodical victim explaining her documentation. They heard, through witnesses and digital analysts, how messages that looked anonymous were not. They learned the marriage was fracturing. They saw photographs and diagrams, where the camera sits when it went dark, where the tape went, how the timeline narrowed to minutes. The state framed it simply: the hoax worked until police got involved. The hoax failed when logs and IPs contradicted the persona. With the hoax failing, the person who built it killed its target. The defense pressed on the absence of direct physical proof. They cross-examined on lab methods, contamination risk, investigative decisions, every gap that could be widened. They argued that if you are going to call a mosaic a portrait, you had better make sure the missing tiles aren't the tiles that define the face. But circumstantial cases don't need every tile. They need enough tiles, arranged with integrity, that the picture is unmistakable. After deliberating, the jury returned guilty verdicts on April 17, 2025, first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. The next day, April 18, 2025, a judge imposed the mandatory sentence: life in prison without parole. Juries weigh doubt, but only the kind tied to evidence. Possible doubt is infinite. Reasonable doubt is disciplined. Sentencing isn't about plot. It's about impact. In official statements and local coverage, we learn the couple's 3 children were placed with family, raised by Crystal's brother and his wife, with support from extended relatives, including her father. The practical meaning of life without parole is that there will be no parole hearings to reopen the wound every few years. The legal meaning is that the state has answered the jury with permanence. Coverage emphasized something rare about this case: how a victim's dedication to record-keeping, her spreadsheet, her insistence on reporting later became the backbone of a prosecution built not on a single gotcha artifact, but on the consistency of her story with the machine's memory of who sent what, when, and from where. We tell people to save everything. Here is the hard reason why. Sometimes the truth needs a librarian. Let's decode, plainly, how ordinary digital artifacts became extraordinary evidence. Email headers/IP logs. Even when a sender masks an account name, network-level details can place the origin on a work subnet or through a known ISP, tightening the suspect pool. In this case, reporting highlights IPs tied to Daniel's workplace, account linkages, reused recovery emails, overlapping login windows, or repeated device fingerprints connect supposedly separate personas to a single user. Cell site and app telemetry. Phones are diaries that don't know how to lie. When a message is sent, the device's location and activity often create time anchors that either support or crush an alibi. Camera anomalies. Security devices can log when they go offline, when their lenses are obstructed, and which user last authenticated to the app. A camera that just happens to fail only when a crime window opens is a story problem with an obvious answer. Trial coverage reference tape found on a lens, and unknown DNA on it. Search histories. In many cases, incriminating research queries become character witnesses no one wants. Media summaries mention disturbing online searches as part of the broader picture presented to jurors. None of these alone convicts anyone. Together, arranged chronologically and cross-checked against human behavior, they begin to behave like geometry. Angles that must meet where they meet, lines that must cross where they cross. When devices and diaries agree, alternate theories have to do more than sound plausible. They have to fit the math. People around someone like Chris still often wonder later, how could I have known? There is no perfect answer, but there are patterns that deserve extra attention, especially when they stack. Isolation disguised as safety. A partner who centralizes control of cameras, passwords, and security, so you don't have to worry. Over specific threats. Anonymous messages that reference things only insiders or confidants should know. Device drama with timing. Cameras fail, accounts lock out, apps crash. Only on days when the target is alone or vulnerable. Narrative triangulation. The supposed outsider also menaces the partner, nudging the household to see itself as a unit under attack. An emotional lock that can keep skepticism out. Documentation fatigue. The victim starts keeping meticulous logs, then apologizes for it, as if being thorough were inconvenient to others. If you see these stacking around someone you love, you don't need to confront a suspect to help. Offer to be the off-site backup for their log. Offer to walk them through filing a report. Offer to be the extra set of eyes on their digital privacy. Remind them that being believed later often starts with being organized now. Hindsight is unfair, but it can still be useful. Independent device oversight. Having two trusted adults, not in conflict, hold admin access to home security can make silent sabotage harder. Work/IT alerts. When harassment flows through work networks, proactive IT alerts about suspicious activity can trigger earlier interventions. Victim advocate liaison. Embedding advocates into police contacts helps convert logs and bodycam statements into protective strategies and faster escalation. Community drills. Families can rehearse evidence capture, the way they rehearse fire drills. Screenshots with full headers, safe storage off shared devices, and non-confrontation rules. None of these are guarantees. They are sandbags, imperfect, human-scale ways to redirect a rising river. By convicting and by sentencing to life without parole, the justice system affirmed 3 truths that matter beyond Broomfield. Hoaxes can be crimes long before they turn lethal. Stalking and criminal impersonation were not side dishes. They were part of the main course. Circumstantial is not second class. Juries are allowed to reason from patterns when the patterns are stable, consistent, and exclusive of innocent explanations. Documentation is an act of courage. The log she kept did not avert the worst outcome, but it preserved the truth against the day someone would try to erase it. If you only remember one thing, don't delete your proof to keep the peace. We return to the garage only to leave it, because that's not where the story lives now. It lives in a spreadsheet that outlived its author, in a set of IP logs that didn't care who was beloved and who was not, in a jury room where strangers studied the tiles and decided the picture was clear. It lives in a quiet house where a doorbell camera once blinked, and where kids arrive home to a rhythm forever changed. It lives, too, in the words investigators and reporters used: staged, impersonation, blinded camera, no direct DNA, life without parole. Those are not just case terms. They're warning labels for the next person who thinks they can build a fantasy that frightens a woman back into a life she no longer wants, and get away with it. When someone tries to turn your life into their script, write everything down. One day, the truth may need your notes. This extended cut is for Crystal Krug, for the rigor and resilience she brought to a situation designed to make her feel crazy. It's for her children and family, who now carry her legacy. If you value careful, victim-centered storytelling grounded in evidence, please share this video and consider subscribing. Someone in your circle may be living a smaller version of this story and not know how to name it yet.
Let's set the scene. A perfectly quiet street in Texas. Then a neighbor hears the impossible. Just 3 gunshots, but they weren't fast. It was one, a weird pause, then 2 quick ones. When the cops got there, the whole scene, the driveway, the house, it looked like a catalog photo. Too perfect, and that was the first red flag. So tonight, we're not just trying to figure out who pulled the trigger, we're asking a deeper question. Did someone stage this? Was this whole scene designed to make the police think it was a stranger? You're going to hear about a 40-second gap in the 911 call that flips the timeline completely. We'll look at a grainy security photo, just a silhouette, that completely destroys the first story they were told. And honestly, we're going to prove that the most dangerous clues are always the ones that seem too obvious to be true. I want you to look at the evidence with me. If something doesn't add up in our breakdown, call it out in the comments. Because by the end of this, you'll have the exact same evidence and logic the lead detective used to close the case. Just a quick heads up, viewer discretion is definitely advised. This story is all about financial pressure, deep psychological patterns, and a plan that only made perfect sense to the person who executed it. I'm Unsolved Crime Case, and here we decode these difficult cases using only facts, logic, and the quiet truth the crime scene was trying to tell us. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the moment this timeline absolutely flips. Ready? Let's step into the driveway. It was just a regular Monday afternoon on a quiet suburban Texas street, December 6, 2021. Then everything shattered. A neighbor, hands probably shaking, had to call 911. They'd heard something no one should hear in a quiet neighborhood. The rapid crack of gunfire slicing right through the afternoon calm. Minutes later, patrol cars screamed up the block and stopped hard at a familiar suburban driveway. The kind of place where kids draw hopscotch in spring and families put up Christmas lights. But this driveway held a different picture. A woman lying still on the concrete with a dark pool spreading under her head. And standing over her was her husband, phone still in his hand, his face pale and empty, like all the color had been erased. Every basic human instinct screamed the obvious. He did this. It looked like an open and shut case, simple and terrible. But the truth they would soon uncover was stranger, colder, and far more planned than anyone could have guessed. Because this isn't a story about a single, explosive moment of rage. It's about a plot that was quietly living in the shadows, coded in text messages, buried under crushing debts, etched by the paths of bullets, and hidden in the one place no one ever thinks to look. The space between what we heard happen and what people say happened. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the end, you'll question not just who pulled the trigger, but why the whole scene looks so perfectly certain of itself in the first place. A quick note, this is a story about a violent crime. We'll be respectful with the details and avoid anything graphic. Also remember, everyone here is innocent unless a court says otherwise. We're just here to learn and discuss the facts. The emergency call hit the dispatch board just after noon. A neighbor, let's call her Mrs. L, reported several shots followed by a scream that was suddenly cut short. Officers arrived fast. First a patrol unit, then another, then an ambulance that slowed right down when the first officer raised his hand. They were too late. The woman on the ground, we'll call her Grace, lay on her side, one arm tucked under her body, the other reaching out as if for the front door. Her husband, Evan, stood only a few feet away, talking to the 911 operator, giving clipped, short answers. The body cam footage would later show the stiff, almost robotic rhythm of first questions at a scene like this. Sir, put the phone down. Step back. Do you have any weapons on you? No, he says. No, someone shot her. I just came outside and... The words just didn't land with the officers. They bounced right off. Because in that first minute, 3 things immediately stood out. First, the driveway laid out a textbook crime pattern, spent shell casings in a loose arc on the right, blood pooling toward the slope, and a slight scuff mark near the garage door. Second, the victim's car was still idling. The driver's door cracked open like a half-told secret. Third, the husband's hands. They were perfectly steady, not trembling, not clasped. Hands like someone waiting to be told what to do next. Evan insisted he was inside, heard the shots, ran out, and found Grace down. He didn't see anyone. But the backyard gate, it was slightly ajar. The side fence, a fresh scrape mark, the neighbor's security light. It had been tripped. Within an hour, the perimeter was taped off, shell casings were marked, photos were snapped, and a grid of the scene was sketched out with careful letters A through J. A detective, Ruiz, arrived and scanned the driveway with an X-ray stare. How far was the gun? What were the bullet angles? Where was the spatter? The shoe prints? Something about it felt arranged, not staged in a theatrical way, but organized, as if the event had been gently nudged into a shape that would look correct in a photograph. Most driveway shootings are messy, panicked, and inconsistent. This one wore a strange neatness, and that's what truly bothered Detective Ruiz. To the people next door, Grace and Evan were the perfect couple. They kept their lawn neat and always smiled at the mailbox. But every marriage has a public face and a private life. There's what you put on display and what you keep hidden in the basement. Grace, in her mid-30s, worked from home in healthcare administration. She was organized, thorough, and hated chaos. Evan managed sales accounts. He was talkative, ambitious, and sometimes a little too ready with a story. Friends described Grace as practical and private, the sort of person who meticulously keeps every receipt for half a year. Evan was the opposite, loud with life, confident, always pushing a new idea. But money, that's where the couple's carefully constructed story started to fall apart. On paper, they looked stable. In reality, credit cards were whispering a much darker tune. 2 years of erratic spending, a burst of high-ticket purchases last summer, and a personal loan taken out under duress. The kind of financial stress that compounds into silent, cold fights handled with forced laughs at dinner parties. Text messages would later show another layer. A recurring theme of Grace pushing for clear boundaries. We can't keep spending like this, and Evan promising changes that never seem to arrive. In marriages like this, 2 separate timelines grow under the same roof. One measured in calendar months and bank statements, the other measured in quiet resentments, unstated fears, and the small lies people tell just to keep their lives looking straight. By late afternoon, the rumor had solidified. The husband did it. People don't need ironclad proof to feel certain. They just need a frame that fits. A woman dead in the driveway. A husband standing there. Money trouble. It all arranges itself neatly in the mind. But detectives don't get paid to trust neatness. Ruiz ordered the standard split. A team for the scene, a team to canvass the neighborhood, and a digital team. The scene team traced the bullet paths and recovered 3 9mm casings. The canvas team knocked on doors. The digital team grabbed doorbell video feeds, scanning for the cameras that often catch more than people realize. Doorbell cameras are time machines. A half-second of pixel blur tells you who left early, who came late, whose dog pulled left at the exact wrong time, and sometimes whose shadow falls over a driveway just before life ends. At 11:32 a.m., the neighbor across the street had a crucial clip. Grace's car pulling in. 30 seconds later, a shape enters the frame from the right. Not clear, just a suggestion of a body. Then the first population, then 2 more. Then silence, except for the idling car and the neighbor's wind chimes. The angle was wrong. The shooter remained off lens. But the audio gave them a gift. The spacing of the shots, 1, then a beat that was just a breath too long, then 2 more. Pattern matters. It sounded deliberate. Listen to the timing, because the shots weren't random. They were timed. And that single detail is how detectives realized the driveway wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the ending. The forensics confirmed 3 shots. One that grazed Grace's shoulder, one entering from a forward angle, and the third fatal one, delivered as she fell. There was no close-range powder burning, no stippling, suggesting the shooter stood several feet away, not face-to-face but offset. The graze wound told a story of motion. Grace was turning toward the sound, not scrambling away from it. The trajectory into the concrete showed the final shot angled slightly downward, consistent with a victim already collapsing. What about Evan's account? He insisted he heard shots while inside, ran out, and found her down. His phone logs verified the 911 call almost immediately after the recorded gunshots. But here was the problem. Almost immediately is not the same as immediately. 30 to 40 seconds elapsed after the last shot before his call connected. It wasn't a smoking gun. People freeze, people scream, people shake. But it was enough of a pause to hang like a fog over his story. Then the oddities started to stack up. The backyard gate was ajar, but the damp soil under it held no fresh footprints. A scuff on the garage door matched the rubber toe of Grace's shoe, evidence of a stumble or a reflexive step backward. The shell casings created a loose crescent consistent with a shooter stepping right to left, moving away from the street toward the side of the house. If a stranger ambushed Grace and fled, why not sprint for the street? Why arc inward toward a side yard with a fence and fewer exits? Detective Ruiz began sketching possibilities on a legal pad. An ambush by an outsider versus a domestic situation made to look like an outsider attack. When your diagram forces you to bend physics or human behavior to make one side fit, you have to seriously circle the other. Phones don't lie, they remember everything. The digital team pulled the message threads. Grace and Evan's text from the previous month read like a broken record. Budget, apology, promise, repeat. The last week added a new note, insurance. Now many couples discuss life insurance as normal planning, but timing is everything in these cases. 2 emails popped up, account changes to an existing policy, and an inquiry about adding an extra rider. The requests appeared routine. The effect in context was damning. On the morning of the shooting, Evan messaged Grace a string of logistical notes, a delivery window, a missed call, a quick love you. Nothing seemed unusual. But minutes before the neighbor's video timestamp, Evan's phone pinged a different thread, a contact saved only by initials, discussing a side opportunity that sounded like fast money. The kind that comes with fine print and invisible, sharp teeth. Detectives learned something else. The couple had argued the night before, quietly in that strangled way couples do when they know the neighbors might hear. A line of Grace's from earlier in the week, saved forever in a text bubble, kept ringing in Ruiz's head. We can stop this before it gets worse. Stop what? Spending? Side hustles? Or the deepening sense that a marriage was approaching a breaking point? Consider the pressure. The messages didn't point to a killer. They pointed to pressure, a pressure that makes otherwise smart people do dangerously stupid math. 2 days into the investigation, Detectives Ruiz and Hart walked the driveway again at sunrise. You learn scenes differently at the exact time of day they happen. The light shows you what it showed them. They stood where the casings were found and mimed a shooter's stance. Right hand hold, slightly sideways, stepping across the arc as each shot discharged. It placed the shooter at an angle that made sense if they approached from the side of the house. Not the street, not the sidewalk. Someone familiar with that exact layout. Someone who knew how to avoid the neighbor's camera's precise field of view. But the front door presented a puzzle. If Evan had been inside at the time of the shots, his route out should have been caught on a different neighbor's camera. A lens that saw a sliver of the porch through a gap in the hedges. It didn't show him until after the shots. So either he truly came out only after the final shot, or he had already been outside, just out of frame, on the side where the casings arced. Ruiz kept that thought quiet for a moment. In homicide work, you let the scene accuse. You don't paint your suspicion onto it. She ordered a gunshot residue test. Routine, though not definitive. She asked for a warrant for Evan's car, despite it being parked out front, clean as a whistle. She wanted to document the emptiness on paper. No gun, no blood, no fibers, to see what wasn't there. Because often, the cleanest car is the loudest evidence of a mess elsewhere. Then a breakthrough arrived, disguised as a dead end. The house next door had an older, cheap camera set to motion, detect that no one knew about. It didn't capture video. It only captured stills. A burst of photos when it sensed movement. In most crimes, that's useless. In this one, it was everything. One still showed a human silhouette near the side of the house seconds before the first shot. Not detailed enough to identify the person, but the posture looked familiar. No weapon was visible. It was a cheap camera, bad resolution. Still, it placed a body where a stranger would least likely be and where a spouse might be without raising a curtain. Detectives brought Evan back for a formal interview. They were careful, respectful tone, open-ended questions, absolutely no accusation. Good interviewers set a table and let their subjects serve their own meal. Evan's story was consistent, perhaps too consistent. He stuck to the exact same sequence, exact same phrases, as if reciting a script. He described Grace pulling in, him hearing 3 pops and then running out. Asked how he knew there were 3, he said he counted 1, then 2 close together. Asked why he hesitated to call, he said he didn't. He grabbed the phone immediately. 40 seconds isn't a hesitation carved in stone. But when you anchor your story to absolutes, the clock becomes a relentless prosecutor. Then came the moment interviewers live for. Not a confession, not a crack, but a blink. Ruiz showed Evan a printed image, the grainy still from the neighbor's motion camera. "Does this look like you?" she asked. He leaned forward. He squinted. He said the obvious. "That could be anyone." "It could be, but if you were inside at the time, if you know that isn't you, you say, no." He said, "That could be anyone." Interview over, Evan walked out with a lawyer's card in his pocket, one he just happened to have. The languages that tell. The driveway told one story, the camera told another, but the language told the truth. People who are certain say no. People who are careful say it could be anyone. The ballistics report came back. 9mm, bullets consistent with common brands, rifling marks suggesting a compact model. Not rare, not traceable to a specific store. If the gun was tossed, it could be anywhere. Crews dredged a retention pond half a mile away. Nothing. Detectives requested sales records. Just noise. Neighbors with handguns, plenty. In Texas, guns are not needles in haystacks. They are hay. But something else arrived with the ballistics. Lead and barium residue on a pair of work gloves found in a plastic bin in Evan's garage. Gunshot residue, GSR, is fickle. The environment contaminates, transfers happen. But these gloves lived in a sealed space, and if Evan wore them to fire a gun, why wear gloves at all? Unless you wanted to avoid getting residue on your skin. A neighbor remembered seeing Evan wear gloves while tinkering with a lawn tool a week prior. Another remembered him mowing without gloves just days before. The story tried to divide itself. Investigators pinned it back to the main road, the glove's residue pattern. It was concentrated in a narrow arc over the knuckles of the dominant hand. If it were lawn equipment, the residue would distribute differently. This pattern matched the mimic stance Ruiz had traced at sunrise. Meanwhile, the digital team unpacked something subtle. Evan had searched local pawn listings over the past month, once for jewelry, once for watches. Grace's jewelry box sat intact in the bedroom, nothing missing. What then was he planning to sell? Debt makes normal people creative. It also makes them dangerous. Friends came forward in small pieces, each offering a shard of glass, none possessing a whole mirror. One said Grace had been sleeping in the guest room sometimes. Another said she joked about marrying his confidence, not his spreadsheets. A third recalled an offhand comment from Evan at a barbecue. Life insurance isn't romantic, but hey, practical is sexy. Dark humor? Maybe. Foreshadowing? Maybe not. But control lurked in the corners. Evan logged into shared accounts more often, tracked Grace's commute, ostensibly for safety, but sometimes texting if she stopped for coffee. Running late? Gentle words with sharp edges. Control often masquerades as care. Only timing reveals its teeth. If you map a marriage's last 6 months, the coordinates look ordinary. If you shade the areas where money, pride, and fear overlap, a new coastline appears. Jagged, hungry, inevitable. The breadcrumbs matter. When pressure climbs, intent doesn't announce itself. It leaves a breadcrumb. A purchase here, a search there, a glove tucked away where it shouldn't be. What happened the day before is important. The couple attended a small gathering, neighbors, snacks, football murmuring from a TV. Witnesses remembered Grace laughing, then growing quiet when Evan drifted into a circle talking about a big quarter and new deal flow. A neighbor overheard Grace say softly, "We should be careful about what we promise." The sentence was a paper cut. You don't bleed out from a paper cut, but you never forget the sting. That night, a message sat unsent in Grace's draft folder on her laptop, addressed to her sister. It read, "I'll explain this weekend. No content following, no saved version, just a subject line. I need to tell you something, and we will never know what it was. An arrest doesn't always announce itself like a movie scene. Sometimes it looks like a polite knock." Evan opened the door at midday the following week, hair damp from a shower, asked if he could change shirts. He was allowed to. Then he was cuffed. The charge? Murder. To charge is not to prove. The district attorney would need a symphony from the small notes Ruiz had gathered. The trajectory patterns, the digital timestamps, the residue on the gloves, the insurance timing, the driveway arc, the language of could be anyone, and that 40-second gap that hung like a chandelier over the whole scene. The defense composed its own melody. No weapon recovered, the unreliability of GSR, an anonymous silhouette in a grainy still, a neighborhood where anyone could have crossed a yard, a wife who pulled in at unpredictable times, and a husband who, though awkward, called 911 and cooperated. Juries don't weigh facts, they weigh stories told with facts. And the story that wins is the one that feels like something real people would do. The truth is in the gap. Trials don't decide what happened, they decide which version of what happened we can live with. The prosecution started with the driveway. It's a good place to start because the driveway is the stage everyone can picture. They introduced the neighbor's audio, letting the jurors feel the spacing. One shot, breathe, two shots. An expert explained why that timing suggested deliberation. The shooter watched the first shot's effect before firing again, closing the narrative gap between a random attack and a targeted act. Then the still photo, the silhouette near the side of the house, not proof but a spine for the theory. Next, the gloves. Expert testimony on how residue is distributed. Calm, careful language, no overreach. Jurors don't like when you tell them, maybe is a must. The defense answered by drilling the holes. GSR transfer is real. The silhouette could be a meter reader or delivery driver. The 40 seconds could be pure panic. The insurance emails were routine. They pulled character witnesses who described Evan as loyal, brash, but never violent. They presented statistics showing most domestic shootings involve a recovered weapon. This one did not. They suggested an unknown assailant, a work dispute, a random robbery gone wrong, a stalker fixated on Grace, and they reminded jurors that not proven equals not guilty. Back and forth, a case is forged. The truth, whatever it is, sits between two anvils and hopes the hammer misses. Why? It's the magic question. Without it, evidence floats like untied balloons. The prosecution didn't claim a single pure motive. They offered a thicket, debt plus control, plus panic, plus the dangerous calculus of a person who believes they can solve a crisis with a permanent answer. They highlighted the insurance timing not as a smoking gun, but as a window into Evan's thinking. The kind of thought process that says, the future will forgive the present, or worse, I can create a narrative that everyone will accept. That's the chilling part of some domestic murders. They're less about anger than they are about storytelling. A person crafts a scene they believe others will read the way they intend. Casings here, gate ajar, a silhouette possible but unknowable. And they forget that scenes don't just present, they confront. If you've ever tried to explain a lie and realized mid-sentence that you're fixing drywall with toothpaste, you know the feeling. It looks okay from 10 feet away. Up close, it crumbles. The self-deception. Killers don't stage scenes for the police. They stage scenes for themselves, to live with what they've done. The jury received their instructions. They asked for the neighbor's audio again. They asked to handle the gloves. They studied the driveway photos, tracing those little A through J markers with their eyes like children learning letters. Most jurors don't decide on a single piece of evidence. They decide on the grammar of the case. And the grammar here had a subject, pressure, a verb, planning, and an object, a scene. The defense had commas, good ones, but not enough periods. When the verdict came back, the courtroom did what courtrooms do. It held its breath. The foreperson spoke. Whether it was guilty or not guilty is almost less important for our story than why. If guilty, it was because the jury believed the scene spoke louder than the absence of a gun. If not guilty, it was because the gaps, real gaps, were holes the law simply cannot leap. But even a not guilty can carry a ghost, the lasting feeling that the driveway still feels wrong. For our purposes as storytellers and learners, the lasting value is the method, not the outcome. Read scenes, measure time, distrust neatness. When crime ends, the paperwork begins. The house is eventually sold. The chalk dust washes away. Grass grows where the evidence markers once stood. Neighbors move. The world insists on moving forward. But victims are not just the bodies we catalog. They are the worlds that collapse around them. Grace's sister, parents, friends, all of them have to cross that driveway in their heads every time they pull into their own. Survivors inherit a scene they never asked to stage. There's a line in the lead detective's notes that never made it to court. Ruiz wrote it during that sunrise walk. Scenes are honest. People are complicated. That's the central balance of every case like this. The driveway told the truth in the language of physics. The people told their truths in the language of fear, pride, love, and the desperate need to be seen as good. The human cost. We solve crimes with measurements. We live with them through stories. It's easy to preach after a case like this. Know the signs, set boundaries, seek help. Those are good words, they matter. But not every story offers a clear road sign right before the edge of a cliff. Here's what we can do. Take pressure seriously, not as an excuse for bad behavior, but as a warning system. Financial and emotional pressure pair like gasoline and spark. Respect the ordinary. Driveways, grocery trips, lunch breaks. Violence hides in routines precisely because routines lower our guard. Listen for language. Control masquerades as care. Text me when you get there can be love or surveillance. Context separates the two. Believe patterns, not moments. A single perfect day doesn't erase a month of fear. A single awful argument doesn't define a marriage. Patterns do. And for investigators and storytellers alike, start with the physics. The angle of a bullet, the arc of a casing, the length of a pause between shots. These are the commas and semicolons of the truth. People can misremember. Concrete doesn't. If you drive past the house today, you'll see a normal street, a new family maybe, a different set of wind chimes. The driveway holds no outline, no stain, but the physics of the event remain. If you stood at the right spot at dusk, you could trace the arc of those casings with your eyes and almost hear the wind carry that neighbor's chimes again. And you would remember that crime is not a burst of chaos. It's the final climax of a hidden plot. On December 6th, 2021, the plot reached its final page. The neighbor's call turned the last leaf, and the driveway told a story louder than any alibi. That pressure plus planning wears a mask called coincidence, and that mask always slips. The final truth, the most dangerous stories are the ones that look obvious, because behind obvious is where the truth hides. If you found this case thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more deep dive documentaries where we honor victims, study the evidence, and decode how ordinary moments turn into headlines. Stay curious, stay critical, and take care of each other.